Teachers of Reddit, what is the most disturbing thing you've heard a student say? This one student once told me, unprompted, I like red cars, because that's the color of car my mum used when she left us to do drugs. I'm a little late. I had a student who was deathly afraid of using the bathroom because monsters who wanted to get her were in the vents. Turns out her dad used to abuse her in the bathroom. I was talking to second graders about body parts. I explained that joints are what make your limbs move. 3 little girls standing together. Girl 1, do you know where your joints are? Girl 2, I don't smoke. Girl 1, confused as fuck. Girl 3, well, there's different kinds of joints. My dad wants to kill me with his hunting gun, was an aide in a guidance office. The most disturbing was a kid we'll call Tyler. He had severe social adjustment issues and tended to say things that creeped people out. One day, he comes in wanting to talk to a counselor. I was playing receptionist that day and told him I let them know, and asked what was up. He very blankly says, I tried to walk out into traffic yesterday. This was obviously alarming, so I brought him straight to one of their offices. He repeats what he told me, and this fucking bitch counselor says, you need to come back later, I'm working on college admissions stuff for other students. He just kind of sighed and left. I had a senior student describe to a friend in class how she was going to fuck her boyfriend that night. The boyfriend is also a student at school. It got disturbing when she asked me for my opinion. One of my students' parents were fighting. Dad left home then came back to talk. They went out to the car to fight so the kids wouldn't hear. He shot and killed the mother then himself. The girl came to school the next day and just said I have nowhere else to go. One year, I was teaching K at a Title I school and one of my students came to school with a band-aid on her forehead. I asked her what happened and she told me her dad had thrown a book at her head and made her bleed. I called CPS and was later told the school counselor that she was removed from the home because dad was psychically and sexually abusing her. I hope they threw the book at him. I had a student, under 10, tell me he wanted to cut my head off and watch me bleed. I had the audacity to tell him that he needed to put his crayons up before he could get his Play-Doh out. I had a girl tell me her father had raped her from the age of 3-7. She started out difficult and by the time she graduated we had formed a great bond. I had a student who had just moved to our school, 3rd grader. His first day he had this huge gash over his nose. I don't know why but I just didn't think much of it. A couple days later I asked him what had happened and he said that his mum's boyfriend's dad pinned him against a wall and whipped him with his belt. Then showed me marks on his back as well. He kind of laughed it off and said, yeah, he's mean. It took every ounce of me not to cry right then and there. I immediately went next door to get an adult to take over my class and ran to the principal. She called the police and they had some kind of excuse why they wouldn't be able to come right away. She demanded they be there today because she was not sending that boy home. They did show up. They walked him home, and they watched as the boyfriend's dad packed up and left. The boy was in 3rd grade, had the dirtiest mouth, and was probably one of the funniest and sweetest kids I'd ever met. He did tell me that the man moved back to Samoa later that year. Mom stayed with boyfriend so knew stuff about the man. He moved schools the next year though, so I don't know how he's doing now. During my 2nd year student teaching, a teaching unpaid internship, a student brought a few bags of heroin to school in his backpack. He pulled them out in the hallway to show his friends before recess. He said I brought treasure from home, my mom says it's worth more than me. The kids were oohing and ahhing. The most fucked up part is that the school expelled him. We didn't help him at all. I think about him still, 9 years later. Trying to convince a 17-year-old student that drugs are not the way to go and that he has a full life ahead of him when he says, doesn't matter ... I'm gonna be dead or in jail by the time I'm 25. He had been told he was nothing his whole life and he absolutely believed it. Spent up until he graduated trying to prove him wrong. A student once told me he was going to burn his house down. We talked about how that would ruin his house and how he could possibly hurt his mum and dad or himself. His reply was, I'd make sure my mum was dead before I burn it down. This kid is 8. I once had a piano student who said he couldn't practice at home because his stepfather would beat him to have to listen to it. It wasn't a student, but his father. A guy came up to me on parents' night and told me to call him if his kid needed a good yelling since his kid was such a useless fuck up. While I stood there in shock he added, he's always been lazy but he's been worse since his roommate at his last school killed himself. Don't hesitate to call me if he pulls that bullshit. Fuck that guy. During a class field trip, a girl in class casually mentioned before everybody that the road we were driving down was the same one she tried to kill herself on the year before because she was bullied so badly. She said she'd been driving and floored it, hoping to hit a tree only to change her mind because she didn't want to hurt her family. It just came out of nowhere and from the girl who was generally considered incredibly popular, kind and well-liked paraprofessional in an elementary school. A kid looked at me and casually said, "My mom died Sunday, her funeral is next week," and shrugged. The one year I taught 5th grade, I overheard a boy talking to his friends about how they should corner a female student in the bathroom and gang rape her while someone stood watch at the door. A couple months later he wrote a very graphic letter that was passed around class about how my giant boobs were the only reason he came to school, and went into explicit detail of how he wanted to titty fuck me. This was 5th grade, he was 10. How on earth was he aware about gang rape and titty fucking? I can't imagine what he was exposed to at home to have that kind of knowledge. I stick to the primary grades now and I've heard some heartbreaking stories, but this one definitely sticks out as the most disturbing. Coached elementary p. Had a 9-year-old student call me an infested tampon sucker. More surprised than angry. At the time I was 23 and never heard an insult like that. I had a student tell me about his parents leaving salt around the house. Bizarre, but I didn't connect the dots until they were arrested. Turns out that was cocaine. 2nd grade teacher here. A student recently told me his parents have a vibrating bed. I had to hold back laughing. Okay, but even sex aside, a vibrating bed sounds cozy as fuck. One of my students threatened to kill my dog while I was out walking her. This was after he had cussed me out, ripped up his work and disturbed the class. It was his 2nd day in class. Thanks for watching. Best of Reddit.